Shalom. Welcome again to Seekers of Meaning, the podcast TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Address. Thank you very, very much for joining us today. What promises to be a very important conversation about an issue that has for a long time and many years within the Jewish community remained hidden. But it is present in many, many, many of our families. And to welcome to our show today, I'd like to introduce Rabbi Harvey Winokur and Hannah. We're going to be discussing their new book called Mussar in Recovery. Mussar in Recovery, subtitled A Jewish Spiritual Path to Serenity and Joy. Something, as we said, extremely important and a subject which in many cases goes relatively ignored by the institutional Jewish community. So first of all, Hannah, Harvey, welcome. It's nice to see you, Harvey. Been a while.
Good to see you.
This is a very, very fascinating book, a very important book for Jewish people who are in recovery, who are looking to do some sense of linkage between the traditional 12-step program and Judaism. And you link this with the ethical construct of Mussar, the traditional Mussar study. So there's lots to unpack. But first of all, I think it's really important. I'm fascinated to ask each of you in your own way, what was the journey that led you to compile this book?
So I was very fortunate in the years that I was with the congregation that I'd founded. I had an individual who was a medical doctor whose specialty was addiction. He actually started an AA group at AA meeting at my congregation. So I had been in conversation with him. I had some opportunities to learn more about 12 steps during that period of time. And then I did a training in spiritual direction, was introduced to Mussar, but just as one of the tools in the toolbox of spiritual direction. Several years later, the URJ, the Union of Reform Judaism, and the Mussar Institute joined together to offer to train Reform rabbis as facilitators in Mussar. I took advantage of that training and wanted to bring it back to my congregation. Actually, in order to do the training, I needed to offer it to my community. I was challenged, of course, by the cost of that, so opened up my computer, and lo and behold, our Jewish Family and Career Services here as part of our Jewish Federation was offering what they called microgrants for their HAMSA program. Their HAMSA program was their outreach to those in recovery. So I submitted a proposal to do the Seeking Everyday Holiness program from the Mussar Institute for the recovery community. And that's where Hannah comes in.
Well, thanks. As I tell this story, which I love to tell, it's almost as if there's the hand of some divine force in this for me. As Harvey just mentioned, I was affiliated with the JFNCS agency here and their Mussar, their HAMSA program. In fact, my responsibility included the decision on who would receive the microgrants. It was important to me to be informed, and I picked up the book, Everyday Holiness, on which the Mussar Institute's program that Harvey was going to teach was based. I started to read the book, and I could not put it down. It felt like it was all about me. So I attended Harvey's class that kind of engaged my enthusiasm around understanding Mussar, and did something that I never do. At the end of that same year, I attended a Mussar Kala, and I was literally sitting in a text study session and realized that there were bright lines between the mechanics, the structure of Mussar study and the structure of working the 12 steps. Mussar, we do Mussar learning around VODs, which are group meetings in which we do learning, and a spiritual partner, a Harvey partner. And that essentially is the same structure in which we do 12 steps. We go to meetings, which are equivalent to our VOD groups, and we have sponsors with whom we wrestle with text and the ideas. And that was just a nugget that resided in my brain over the next 7 or 8 or 9 years, during which I studied Mussar, including the fact that Harvey was one of my teachers. And that work allowed me to fill in the blanks of that structure and see that not only were these mechanically similar, but Mussar brought a Jewish voice to the recovery process as outlined in the 12 steps.
So Harvey, for there may be one or two people who are not familiar with what Mussar is. Could you just give me a really brief introduction to what is Mussar?
Mussar is a 1,000-year-old Jewish tradition, which was pretty much embedded in the ultra-Orthodox Eastern European communities and was not really spread throughout the community. It wasn't based as much on practice. It was more on developing character traits called soul traits, or in the Hebrew, the midot, the measures. And the way Mussar looks at the character traits is, if they're in balance, we can deal with issues that bring up anger. We can focus on how we are working with our humility. But I'm going to say most times, many times we are challenged by the extremes. We are pushed to the limits, so we become outrageously angry. We are more, kind of larger than ourselves in an environment, so our humility is unbalanced. So about 1800, a Rabbi, Israel Salanter, took the tradition and brought it to his students and told the students to bring it to the community. But he added the practices that we'll be talking about and that you read about in the book. And in so doing, the process of becoming a better self is really the process of putting your character traits in balance.
So you have in the book this rather interesting statistic of 40% of Jewish individuals indicated that they knew someone who currently battles with substance abuse. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. In your understanding, both of you, how much of this is genetic? How much of it is perhaps passed down from generation to generation? In one of the classes I teach on pastoral counseling, we use an article based on the book of Genesis of transgenerational pathology that's passed from generation to generation to generation. If I'm not mistaken, there's been studies upon this being reflective of abuse, substance abuse. Is in your studies, in your experience, how true is this?
When you look around the rooms of recovery where people who are seeking recovery gather, and you listen to people's stories, you realize that there is, at the very least, a genetic predisposition. You hear that, all over people's family trees, they have people who are addicts. And when you hear people's stories, you see that there is a cross-generational impact. We talk about addiction as being a family disease. But when there is an addict in the family, it disturbs the entire family system. And it creates a level of chaos and detachment and isolation, which transfers from one generation to the next. So there are obviously groups for alcoholics. There are groups for all kinds of different addicts. There are groups for people who love them. And then, as an example, there are groups for adult children of alcoholics. So although the direct disease itself, the allergy to the substance, might not be present, all of the isms, all the manifestations and crazy thinking that comes from having been raised in a home that wasn't stable, in which there wasn't healthy love, that gets passed on from generation to generation as well.
you outline, you have the second huge section of the book is called the treasure map. And you walk people through the 12 steps, aligning each step with the midot from Mussar. Could you, because this is the heart of the book. This is I think, as I went through this is the heart of what you're trying to explain. Walk me through. First of all, the title is interesting, the treasure map, but how these different midot impact the steps of the program.
I think what Hannah and I found was that, I don't know if use the word impact. I think there was a synthesis almost between the step and what we came up with. And I say come up with because, as you read in the book, we have a major midah, step one, it's truth. And then we offer some secondary midot, realizing that there are so many character traits that are a part of any particular step. So that sense of not just putting something that was going to add on to, but really was almost an extension of. And I hand it over to Hannah.
Mm-hmm. When we started to put the book together, we started with identifying a core principle that was associated with each step. And then we identified the midot that related to that principle, recognizing that as Harvey just said, there are many. And we felt strongly that there were some that were really important for people to have in their pockets after reading the book, and identified those as the primary midot that we talked about for each of the steps. And as he mentioned, identifying secondary midot. The 12-step program is, I guess, an evidence-based program. It doesn't work for everybody, and not everybody needs the 12 steps to get sober or to live a life in recovery. People who don't have substance abuse but love a person who does, which was my particular case. I have relatives who are addicts, and I love them. And what I became aware of is that I was an addict too. I was simply addicted to them. They were addicted to a chemical, but my thinking was as crazy as theirs. So our goal was to bring a Jewish voice to recovery. So in the book, we take each of the steps and we distill it into its important points, and then we bring Mussar wisdom to those, so that a Jew who goes into the rooms of 12 steps encounters a number of barriers within the community, and just within kind of myths that are perpetuated. And our goal was to overcome those, which was, you referenced the early part of the book, but then to have people who are Jewish, who are struggling with this disease in one way or another, feel a part of the recovery journey, because there were voices in Mussar wisdom and in other forms of Jewish wisdom that spoke directly to the teachings that were associated with the step.
One of the myths that we keep hearing is I'm uncomfortable walking into a 12-step program at Saint somebody's church because it's really Christian. We got to talk about that, because everybody I know, rabbis, clergy, mental health who walk with people, hear this all the time. Myth, fact, explain.
Total myth. It is true that the program of Alcoholics Anonymous originated with two people who shared the same religious background, but there is no mandate to worship a particular God or any God for that matter. The only thing that's important is that desire to stop your obsessive thinking, and we do that in partnership with some force that's bigger than we are. Some people call that God, some people call it the program, some people call it their sponsor. But it is not a Christian cult. It is not, there's no requirement to be Christian. And as I understand, the tradition, There was a concern about the appearance of a Jew walking into a church to attend a meeting. We're not. Most of the meetings are not in prayer spaces; they're actually in classrooms, and there may be a Christian icon on the wall, but that's not what we're there to focus on.
I think what you referred to, Richie, is that yes, for some Jews who are desiring to be in recovery, entrance into the church becomes a barrier. But the program itself and what they do within is not. So it's almost a physical off-putting rather than a programmatic off-putting.
Why aren't more groups in synagogues?
That's an interesting question. I think that I cannot speak for the statistics. I mean, I know in my community, there are 3 synagogues that have AA meetings and other recovery meetings as well. And I think if there was a survey, we would probably find that there are more Jewish community synagogue centered groups that are meeting that we realize.
One of the aspects that you address, I think, at around page 76, is the definition, and Hannah alluded to it, of the power greater than myself. That power does not have to be a supernatural being. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct.
Could you talk to me about that? Because there's so many people who say, well, I can't buy into the hearer, listener, doer, somebody's list. That's not where I am. So talk to me about that. Is that another myth?
The language that's used is a God of your understanding. And it is exactly something other than yourself. When you are in the ravages of the disease of addiction, essentially you want to be in control. You want to be God, either of your own self, or if you love somebody who's struggling with the disease, you want to be their God and save them. The idea here is that we suspend being in control and seek help from outside of ourselves. And I think in the book I talk about, godness versus goodness. That is really what we're seeking here, is to find our goodness and the goodness in the universe so that we don't feel alone. Addiction is a disease of isolation. The program of recovery is a we program, as is, Jewish tradition is built on community. So God simply is a way of talking about finding support, finding a belief system that's beyond your own power to be in control.
This podcast, the TV, is going to post. We're at the end of Elul. We're going to be welcoming the high holidays, the concepts of tshuva, repentance. In the book, you link this to that step of making amends. So could you, because it's very, very timely, because it's all over the liturgy now in the next month. Talk to me about how you're linking that concept of tshuva, making amends, and I think with the midah of chesed. Harvey, can you take that?
Well, when we look at tshuva, it's a sense of returning to self. It's trying to explore and return to the core of our being. In disordered behavior, obviously, it's in a Mussar way, it's out of balance. And the pathway that we have in Elul, which we're now in the process, was almost going to be in the process of in this last month on August the 25th, I believe, is going to once again kind of laser focus us on how do we use our character traits, chesed in one instance, others that we have secondary, to put those behaviors in balance. Hannah?
When you look at 12-step work at a high level, the program kind of has 3 chunks. The first 3 steps are developing a relationship with something outside of yourself. Steps 4 through 9 are cleaning house, and steps 10 through 12 are serving others. And the process of Elul is exactly cleaning house. So, in the course of our disease, we can live in a place that's out of balance. We can cause hurt to ourselves and with others. And the work of Elul and Teshuvah is returning to ourself, returning to our best self. So it directly parallels the process of taking an inventory of what we've done well is important. Mussar doesn't just focus on where we've fallen short, but we can look at and celebrate where we've done well. And where we have fallen short, the idea is to identify that, to identify people. And in the process of Teshuvah, it is to take responsibility with compassion for others, because we don't want to cause any additional pain, but to take responsibility and to identify what it is that we're going to be doing different in the future, which in fact was Maimonides' teaching on Teshuvah, right? It's not only saying, I'm sorry, but it's committing to what it is you're going to do different in the future. So if you're presented with the same trigger, you won't repeat the same behavior that's hurtful.
One of the beauties of Mussar is that we're not simply saying within Mussar that, you're broken, everything is out of balance. We recognize that many of our character traits are strong and boost us up. And Mussar tries to have us understand how we can use the stronger of our traits to uplift those that challenge us. And I think that's a part of that balance that Hannah brings into the book and brings into the program and understanding. And it's one thing also is that clearly this Mussar recovery is not just for those in 12 steps. I mean, it's recovery, regardless of the program. There are many different programs out there, many different disorders.
So Harvey and Hannah, then picking up on what you just said, who's this book for and how do you want it used?
Well, I'll kick off the answer to that question. When I found myself experiencing addiction in my family, I met with silence and isolation from the Jewish community. And I felt that I couldn't avail myself of the resources of that were, related to proven recovery pathways. And addressing people like myself is an important target for the book. For anybody who is already in recovery, the goal is to deepen their insights about the step, but also to bring them new tools and a sense of pride and belonging by virtue of the Mussar piece of things. But in addition, as Harvey just mentioned, it needn't be recovering from a substance. It could be recovering from an addiction to a person. It's anything that causes your life to become out of balance is fair game or a reasonable target for the work that we outline in this book. So any seeker will find something, I think, of meaning in the book. The combination of the program work, the 12-step program work and Mussar improves your relationship with the universe in general. And importantly, it also improves your relationship with yourself. And that's an important benefit for anybody who reads it.
It's really been welcome that when we have informed our community, friends, members of the Mussar community about the book, they have really expressed a hunger for this type of connection all across the addiction community, recovery community. The ability to have, I say another tool in that toolbox to be able to work with that is specifically in a Jewish context is really a beautiful thing. What's interesting too is that yes, we've considered it as a book for those who are Jewish in recovery, Mussar in recovery. But we know that this proposal of Mussar in working in your character traits is really universal. In fact, I've worked with individuals who are not of the Jewish faith. With Mussar, there's no barrier.
Well, the midot are universal. Yeah,
Yes.
I'm sorry, Hannah, go ahead.
I want to comment on one of the things that makes the book unusual, different. That's a very valuable tool is the continuum. Now, we've talked about midah or midot, and Harvey talked about the middle ground. We present in the book a tool for anybody that puts each of the soul traits on a continuum, in which case you can have too much of it or too little of it. The center zone is the zone of being in balance. And for each of the continuum, we kind of give some hash marks on it, some measurements, so that people can self-identify. And when they find themselves at an extreme, use the tools that we present to bring themselves back to the center. That tool for self-awareness is an important part of Mussar. Mussar teaches self-awareness, self-refinement, and then ultimately we change with the ideal that, everybody seeks for the highest level of change, kind of working yourself up a ladder toward wholeness and holiness. But that tool is one of the things that makes this book very different and universally applicable, because anybody can find themselves on that midah, on the continuum, and anybody can figure out how to practice bringing themselves back to the center.
And as Alan Arenas emphasizes in his Everyday Holiness, everybody is on their own spiritual curriculum journey. And that's one of the beauties of connecting Mussar with individuals in recovery. It's very individual.
Yeah, and that's one of the, especially this time of year, that's one of the key messages. And Alan actually has a new book coming out. He's agreed to do a podcast for us, which we'll record sometime soon and probably be posted sometime in October. One of Hannah was alluding to the graphic of the bar in the beginning of a lot of these chapters on each of the midot, where you can place yourself. And also at the end of these chapters, there's this checklist and prompts and also a playlist, which I really thought was very, very cool, because I actually knew, some of us of a certain age will recognize a lot of these songs. And I'm glad you did that, because it also takes us from like, oh, this is so ethereal and cosmic, to, hey, I can put on a record or play a song, and immediately that will link into what you're talking about. You're also doing a very nice job in the middle of the book about linking aspects of addiction to text, Jewish texts, which gives it this linkage of the Exodus or Lech Lecha, of letting go of certain things and taking the risk of going into recovery. I think this is really, really important. So again, the book can be used as a teaching tool within a synagogue or a JCC, to outline how these classic texts relate to exactly what you're talking about. You have another wonderful little line that I underlined and loved, and which I have to ask you to comment on it, because it really speaks to, I think, the self-awareness. It also speaks to the time of year which we are in Judaism, and about this concept of holiness is not about perfection. I think that's the quote. Holiness, Kedusha, is not about perfection. And we do live in a society which advertises perfection, and immediately reminded me of the broken tablets midrash. So could you talk about how you understand this concept from the point of view of the book of holiness is not about perfection? How do you want to start?
Sure. we're talking about a journey of becoming our best selves. And, through a Jewish lens, we respond to the biblical kind of commandment or opportunity. I am holy and you shall be holy. And that can become aspirational, but it teaches us what we're striving for as we kind of manifest being our best selves. I envision holiness as working myself up a ladder by exercising the midot and performing mitzvot in the course of my everyday life, serving what I call God and serving other people. And a quote that's related to that for me is that we're perfectly human and humanly imperfect. And, I view God having created the universe to give me a playground on which to refine myself and perfect myself and participate in my own creation. And for me, I do that and striving to become more holy and kind of meet the opportunity that I've been given in my life head on.
Yeah, there's a wonderful little book I'm sure you're familiar with, Richie, The Spirituality of Imperfection.
Oh, it's right. It's right there.
Exactly.
It's right.
Exactly.
I use it all the time. It's a great book.
Al Marinas, when he talks about, Kedusha, holiness, he talks about shlemut, wholeness, that sense of we're working toward a sense of completion, but we are a work in progress. That's why we're not looking for perfection. We're not looking for completion. We're just looking to try to bring the pieces together to be more whole. Our goal is shlemut. And within that sense of fulfillment, that sense of peace, that sense of being the persons we want to be, that journey to being the better selves, holiness and wholeness.
Yeah. In one of the workshops that we do in Jewish Sacred Aging, we talk about 4 values for baby boomers, and it ends with this concept of shlemut. And I'm glad you emphasize the fact that this is a very, very personal journey, and that there's no right way, that everybody is on this path. Towards the end of the book, you have these, speaking of 4 values, a very lovely section where you take a look at Gevurah, Hitlamdut, Anava, and Hakarat Hatov. So could you walk me through what they mean and how you understand these 4 values? I always think about the 4 poles holding up a chuppah, but speaks to a relationship. And so Gevurah, Hitlamdut, Anava, and Hakarat Hatov.
I'm going to start with the Hitlamdut.
Yeah, sure. But that's your book.
I like very much the way Rabbi Mark Margolius of the Institute for Jewish Spirituality speaks of it is a journey to non-judgmental awareness. You cannot begin the journey of Mussar. You cannot begin to look at your character traits without being honest. And then, Hannah can kind of pick up on all of that. But that Hitlamdut is really the key that opens up the journey to the Gevurah, the Anava. Hannah?
We wanted to end the book by giving our readers a vision for how to actualize the midot that we spoke about in the 12 steps. And to your, just a quick mention, you mentioned the point about text in the book. There was something for me very cool in having somebody 1,000 years ago or 300 or 400 years ago describe me today. And it's because Mussar really deals with our human nature, which over time hasn't really changed. And for that reason, for me, it was enlivening to read sacred text from our sages. But back to your question, we wanted to give people kind of a vision of how to actualize this all going forward in real life. And it was for that reason that we identified, the orientation of approaching your life and approaching the world with an attitude or a willingness to embrace change. And in doing that, we said, that's an opportunity to practice strength, both resolve and open-mindedness. Open-mindedness related to what you just talked about with Harvey in terms of non-judgmental curiosity. We talked about a sense of community, being part of community, being a citizen of community, and cherishing community, and doing that by treating others with compassion, trying to meet their needs in a way that is good for all involved. Practicing forgiveness, which is an important element of humility, and in terms of gratitude, being aware of the gift that we have, with both a reverence for, and an excitement for the life that we're given to practice.
So, the Mussar in Recovery, a Jewish spiritual path to serenity and joy, published by Ben Yehuda Press, I would imagine available at the usual suspects of where one gets a book. This is a very, very important contribution, I think, right now to where we are in our lives, in our world. So I wish you continued success with this book. And hopefully people, when they listen or watch this edition of Seekers of Meaning, will be motivated to get it. And thank you for doing this. This is really important.
Thank you.
We do appreciate your time. Harvey and Hannah, Hatzlacha, Shana Tova.
Thank you.
Stay healthy. That's most important.
You too.
Thank you.
For all of you, thank you very, very much for joining us on today's edition of the Seekers of Meaning podcast TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. Again, I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. If you'd like to make a comment on the show or suggestion, please feel free to email me at rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com. If you'd like to support the work of these podcasts, if you go to the website, jewishsacredaging.com, you will find a very conveniently located donate button. Just click on that, follow the prompts. It's really, really easy. You don't even need a 12-year-old to do that. We can do it. Seekers of Meaning is produced at the broadcast centers of Lubecken Media here in beautiful Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and a shout out to our producer, Steve Lubecken. To all of you, thank you very, very much for joining us. I hope you gathered a tremendous amount of information on today's subject. It's very, very, very important because, as we saw at the beginning, there's so many families who are dealing with this and so many families who just aren't coming forward. And we need to let people know that there's assistance, help, support, and a focus geared to and based in Jewish tradition. So until we see each other again on the next Seekers of Meaning, please stay safe, everybody. Happy New Year, stay healthy, and most of all, be kind to one another.